I just love being with my dog. We like to be outside together, and we play together, and it really feels good knowing that she'd protect my family. But you know, we didn't get here by dominance. It was actually healthy canine leadership. And I'll tell you, when I've seen people make the mistake of trying to force a behavior change on a pet, they end up with a lot more trouble. But don't worry about mistakes. Your dog will give you a do-over. And oh, Cindy, hello, thank you for coming. You know, in case we haven't met, and I know Cindy knows me. In case we haven't met, I'm veterinarian Dr. Jeff Nickel. This is, by the way, this is Miss America, the Nickel family border collie. And this is Gaston, and this is Tony. And Tony, you just made this big mess, you little rascal. And now Miss America is going to be digging cat food out of my lap. Well, all right. Anyway, you know, these pets are a little bit of chaos when you have pets, isn't there? Miss America, honey. So anyway, you're welcome to ask me anything you want about cats and dogs. Physical stuff, behavioral stuff. I've been in practice for such a long time, there's hardly anything I haven't seen. But tonight we're going to talk about behavior. And please put something in the comment line if you have a question. If you've had issues with attempts to dominate, and please don't worry about mistakes. We've all made them. These things can be challenging, and it's very understandable how frustrating this kind of stuff can be. Or maybe there's someone else in your family who's believe that dominance theory is the way to go. And we're going to talk in depth about that for a few minutes. I'll try to make it interesting. We've got some research and that kind of stuff. But any questions come up, please just put them in the comment line. So I want to talk about something. Excuse me, Gaston. This cat standing on my paper. This is from the American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior. And I am a member, of course. Let me just show you what this looks like. It's a position statement. And it's not really written for veterinary behaviorists like me or general practicing veterinarians. It's actually written for pet parents. And there are several position statements by the AVSAB. This particular one is on dominance theory. And so I'm going to, at the end of our Facebook Live, excuse me, girlfriend, will you sit, please? Thank you, darling. I'm going to go put on my Facebook page a link so that you can read the whole thing if you want to. It's very well written, and there are lots of references to robust research. And somebody else just came. Who else is here? This thing takes, well, it takes a minute. Martha, oh, thank you. I'm glad you're here too. I appreciate that. So anyway, this is called the Position Statement on the Use of Dominance Theory in Behavior Modification of Animals. And I'm by no means going to try to read the whole thing, but let me just point out a few important points here. The AVSAB, again, the American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior, is concerned with the recent reemergence of dominance theory and forcing dogs and other animals into submission as a means of preventing and correcting behavior problems. Well, yeah, this sort of thing we thought had gone out of vogue, and well, for a few important reasons, it is making a reemergence. And you have to recognize the difference between trying to dominate another creature and motivating them with methods that actually hearken to who they are and what drives their behavior. And we've got a lot of research on this. So here are a few key points. Despite the fact that advances in behavior research have modified our understanding of social hierarchies in wolves, many animal trainers continue to base their training methods on outdated perceptions of dominance theory. Dominance is defined as a relationship between animals, individual animals, that is established by force, aggression, and submission to determine who has priority access to multiple resources such as food, preferred resting areas, and mates. And there's a real new research paper here actually done on rats, and I'll explain. You think, well, what the heck's that got to do with dogs? Actually, quite a lot, and I'll explain that too. And you might find this really fascinating because I saw parallels with experiences I've had with human situations, largely the way I was raised. But anyway, most undesirable behaviors in our pets are not related to priority access to resources. Rather, they are due to accidental rewarding of undesirable behavior. And if you've been to my Facebook Lives more than a couple of times, you've heard me point out, and again, everything I share about behavior is just like everything I share about internal disease, wounds, skin disease, I mean, you name it. It's all research-based because veterinary medicine is evidence-based. Well, people accidentally reinforce the wrong behaviors. They try to correct the dog or the cat, but especially true in dogs, and hoping that they'll quit the behavior because they've been scolded or reprimanded, when in fact dogs believe that any response from a leader is intentional as a validation for their behavior and of their emotional state of the moment. Yeah, because they don't believe that they are entitled to a response from their leader. And that's very different than a human who is a subordinate in a hierarchy, whether it's our children or whether it's people in the workplace. There's a hierarchy there, right? And if you are of a higher ranking individual, like you're a child in the home or you have a boss, it is completely important and necessary sometimes to go to that individual higher than you and say, "Excuse me, girlfriend, I have a question. I need you to help me out with something," right? I mean, we do that. That's part of how we interact with other people. But it's important to remember that as much as we love our pets as though they were little children in furry suits, and I'll tell you that's the way I am with mine, and that's good for all of us, you also have to bear in mind that they're actually not little children in furry suits, but they're members of a different species, and they have their own perspectives. And we cannot train our pets to think like humans. It isn't going to happen. We are smarter than they are, believe it or not, and we humans are capable, in this example, of learning canine leadership. Our dogs are not going to learn human followership, okay? And so trying to, force our dogs into behaviors that they don't understand, everybody gets frustrated, and the damage to the relationship, we can usually turn it around, but you don't want to go down that path, right? So let me just share something else with you. And again, I'll put the link to this position statement in my Facebook page, because if you're interested, it's very well written. It's not researchy. It's written for the layman, and it's very easy to follow. The AVF-SAB emphasizes that the standard of care for veterinarians specializing in behavior is that dominance theory should not be used as a general guide for behavior modification. Instead, behavior modification and training should focus on reinforcing desirable behaviors, avoiding the reinforcement of undesirable behaviors, and striving to address the underlying emotional state and motivations. In other words, why is this happening? We see a pet come into a general veterinary hospital, and let's say the pet is limping. Well, we don't want them limping because we know they're in pain. And, I'll tell you what, if my dog is lame and, she's 13 now and occasionally we have that problem, well, I give her anti-inflammatories and pain relievers because I want her to feel better, right? But it's also important to know why that's happening so we can treat the underlying cause. Whether it's vomiting or coughing or itching and scratching or barking excessively or biting or house soiling, all of that stuff. And in fact, recently, this good girl right here has had a hard time getting through the night without urinating. Now, she's my girl. I've treated a lot of this for behavioral reasons as well as physical causes throughout my career. And I could probably figure it out on someone else's dog, but she's mine. And how am I going to be objective with this girlfriend here? So I took her to our internal medicine specialist at the Veterinary Emergency and Specialty Hospital, where I see my behavior cases. And I said, Dr. Steffens, actually I call her Julie because we're colleagues and we go by first names. I said, Julie, would you look at Miss America for me and figure this out? And of course she did a really extensive diagnostic workup, including an ultrasound evaluation of her abdomen, not to mention blood work and a very thorough physical exam, and a urinalysis and a urine culture. Now, Miss America had not been outside squatting frequently to urinate, just like a person would with a bladder infection, because the bladder wall's inflamed and it's thickened and the brain says, hey, it's time to go, and you've only have a few drops. Same symptom in most dogs with bladder infections. Well, she wasn't straining, and so I thought, yeah, she's 13, and cancer it's on the list of possibilities on older dogs until it's ruled out. I was right there holding Miss America on her back in the V-trough. It was comfortable, but she wasn't happy. And I was right there to comfort her, and Dr. Steffens did the ultrasound, and I was on the edge of my seat. You know, are we going to find a tumor in this little girl's bladder or some other problem? She goes, nope. She goes, about the most boring ultrasound, excuse me, gentlemen, I have ever seen. And that sounds real good to me. But urinalysis came back, got a bladder infection. Well, we started antibiotics right away. So we found the cause. That matters, doesn't it? Well, the same is true with behavior problems. You know, it's not behavioral or physical. Behavior comes from the brain, and that's a very physical organ. And we, again, have research to show how to bring out the best. Well, kindness is a big part of this, and kindness towards people and kindness towards other species, you know, has a lot in common, doesn't it? And many of the behavioral rules are very similar because learning theory is actually something that is identical across all species, which is why this research on lab rats, I'm going to explain in a few minutes, again, you'll find it fascinating, and you might see parallels from your own life. Again, I did with mine. So, striving to address the underlying emotional state and motivations, including medical and genetic factors that are driving the undesirable behavior. Anyway, this goes on. There's more information here, and you know, you're welcome to read all of it, and I'll put the link in my on the Facebook page. Okay. So if you've ever struggled try to get a dog to do what you want, try to get a dog to stop the bad behaviors that really are so frustrating and can be dangerous, can be damaging, put those in there. We can talk about those. I'm happy to do it, and I am absolutely never judgmental because that doesn't help anybody get it right, and it doesn't bring out anybody's best. And like I said when I started this thing, don't worry about your mistakes. We have all done it, one mistake or another, and our dogs are the most forgiving creatures out there, and they will give you a do-over. And a big part of my clinical work when people bring their pets to me is I say, yeah, okay, that didn't work. You know, if it had worked, you wouldn't be here now. So here's what we're going to do instead, and this is why we understand why it will work well, or it ought to, no guarantees. And if we see that a behavior modification method didn't give us the result we needed, we often learn from it with that individual, and then we make an adjustment. And we fine-tune our management and behavior modification based on what we learn as we go. So this isn't that hard. Well, it is challenging, but the basic concept isn't that hard. Okay, so here is the journal. I'll show you this. This is the Journal of Veterinary Behavior. Of course, I'm a subscriber to this. And this just came out last couple of weeks, okay? And it's got a lot of really current research. Miss America, you have another foxtail on your head, girlfriend. We have these things in our yard. We try very best to stay ahead of them because they can cause enormous trouble, and we've avoided that. So anyway, here is this paper called Subordination in Female Rats Impedes Learning as Determined by a Judgment Bias Training Protocol. We don't have to get into the weeds on the research side of this thing. But let me point out that why female rats? Why not rats of both sexes? Well, when they do research, they try to narrow down the cohort, the group that they're working with. And because there can be sex differences, let's eliminate that as a possible confounding factor and say just one sex. And in fact, these research papers reference lots of other related research, and some of that was male rats. And some of these things are going to be analogous and some aren't. And research isn't simple. And there's a lot of criticism from other researchers, and that's always welcome. And it looks like somebody has a question if I can get my iPad to work. You know, there's a trick to this, Carolyn, and I'm never real clear on the concept because sometimes. I'm sorry?
Can you scroll? Is it there?
Yeah, it's not.
You want me to take it?
Yeah, if you don't mind, because I'm touching the lower left corner here, and I cannot get the darn thing to show me because somebody just came up with a question. I can see it on my iPhone. So we'll get to that in just a minute. Anyway, it just starts out in the abstract saying legislative direction has encouraged the standard laboratory practice of group housing rats for scientific purposes. Frankly, they found it was more humane. that most of the research animals, whether they're monkeys or guinea pigs or rats or dogs, are going to be, we're not going to have confounding factors because of social and behavioral stresses that can not just foul up our behavioral research, but other kinds of research too. We try to keep it simple, and because in this case, rats being social, and we understand that, they group house them. And now this paper is all about how does that affect learning. So, Michael, wonderful. He's from the AVMA, American Veterinary Medical Association. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us. I wonder if you've seen or, heard of any COVID-related behavior issues in pets, not from getting sick, but from changes in routine. Pet owners are home more often or going back to the office after being home more, or any other reasons. Well, Michael, thank you. Actually, I get to see Michael. I have gotten to see Michael annually at the AVMA convention in various cities, and of course this year we didn't have it because conventions sort of didn't happen. So Michael, it's just great to talk to you. And we are actually working very hard, and in fact I've done some Facebook Lives where I've encouraged people to use the Assisi Calmer Canine. It's a pulse electromagnetic field device for reducing anxiety in dogs who have been borderline or actually have had significant separation anxiety problems back when their people were at work all day, and then their folks come home and now everybody's home together and the dogs think they've died and gone to heaven, right? Because mom and dad are here, what do we have to worry about, right? Well, when mom and dad go back to work, and what I found very often is that when there are two people in the home, very often, they have different jobs, and one of them is already going back to the office more of the time, and ultimately, most everybody who's been working from home is going to be working away from home again, and it will destabilize some of these dogs. And now is the time for these pets to start learning how to be alone again. And there are behavior modification methods for that. Again, you can go to YouTube and go to my YouTube channel, which is Dr. Jeff Nickel, youtube.com/Dr. Jeff Nickel. And you can search and put in there separation anxiety, and you will see my videos on using, in some cases, the severe ones medication. The Assisi Calmer Canine, very, very safe, effective in about 80% of cases, which is really quite tremendous. And there are behavior modification methods. And people can go to my website, which is drjeffnickel.com, drjeff.nichol.com, and that is searchable. And you can look up separation anxiety. And there's a lot of stuff that I have in there. But Michael, you are totally correct. We are concerned about that. And who knows when we get to the new normal, when most of us are vaccinated and we don't have to worry so much about being socially distanced, and we can go back to work safely. I think we're going to see a real upsurge in these problems. But boy, we're trying to get ahead of this as best we can. So thank you for bringing that up. So anyway, here's this thing about these rats. And what we've come to learn with this is that there is a hierarchy when you group house rats, and we see this with cats and dogs. There's a hierarchy between the two Nickel family cats, Tony here and Gaston, and a few minutes ago you saw a little dust up. And part of the problem is that they're close together on this table. We've got treats. They don't necessarily compete for the food the way dogs will, and very often dogs do, but they're close together. They're kind of behaviorally aroused because there's food there, and they love these Facebook Lives. They want to show up here every day in my upstairs office, which generally they don't come in here, but boy, when there's a Facebook Live, they know that there's snacks in these little indoor hunting feeders, these little food toys for cats, which are excellent. So, there's a hierarchy here. The white guy, Gaston, will push Tony away from food. We have to be very careful because this does happen, and they don't fight over it. But, it's not good for Tony's well-being. He's the older guy. He's almost 15. And this is about intimidation with these rats. And we see this with dogs. In a family that has multiple dogs, and they live in a house, a building with walls, and you think, well, of course we do, and we have a fence. Well, so if we at our house. But the problem is that what dogs can't do when they're, as we say with lab animals, group housed, is there are limits to how they can distance themselves from each other, how they can or can't escape or avoid interactions that might scare the heck out of them, because there is a dominance hierarchy between dogs in a group, and to a degree between cats in a group, and certainly with rats in a group. But there is not between people and their dogs. And there is not between cats and their dogs, which is really what the AVSAB position statement that I was just reading from is about. Your dog does not regard you as another dog. She or he knows that you're a human and that you're the leader and that you control his or her access to all resources, not just food, but interactions from you, which again is why you don't say anything when you see behavior you don't want. But these rats, this research study is about their interactions among each other. And here's what they found. They had 20, in this case female rats, that were used in this study. I highlighted a few things I wanted to read to you. And they found that subordinate rats, and they were able to study their behaviors, and they learned who were the high-ranking rats in each group, housed together, who the low-ranking ones were, and those in the middle. And they found that subordinate rats took significantly longer to learn. They used a maze test. It's really rather interesting. They had to go one direction or another, and there was a better food reward in one direction than the other. And the little pathway in each direction had sandpaper, nothing that was going to cause them any discomfort. But one type of sandpaper with the fine grit in it led to the tasty reward. It was some kind of special lettuce that they really like. And the harsher grit sandpaper led to the lesser desirable food reward. And the whole point was that the rats learned that, oh, when I feel this type of sandpaper on my feet, that's the direction of the really excellent reward. And they found that the lower status rats took longer to learn that. Rats identified to be subordinate have previously shown anxiety-like behaviors. They've known that from other research. And they found that subordinate male rats, in a different study, responded with increased displays of neophobia, fear of unfamiliar fill-in-the-blank, unfamiliar living areas, unfamiliar food, unfamiliar people, unfamiliar rats, neophobia, fear of new stuff. And so it was the lower status rats who had shown that they had a hard time adapting to change. Well, these findings highlight that psychosocial stress is derived from subordination, causes significant impairment to the ability of rats to learn simple tasks. A possible mechanism for this impairment could be due to corticosteroid release as a result of the subordination, because they have learned from other studies that when they test the cortisol, which is the body's own cortisone, it's a stress hormone, and there's more of that in subordinate rats because they're being intimidated. And that in turn is significantly slowing their ability to learn. Well, you know what? I think, I'm not an expert, I'm not a residency trained specialist in behavior of humans, but I believe that children who are intimidated may have a harder time learning. And those who are raised in more well-adjusted homes do better in school. Actually, they do know that, don't they? And we know, and I can tell you this from my clinical experience, that dogs who are housed in a home with 2 or 3 other dogs, and people come to me for help with aggression from the pushy, dominant, higher status dogs, that the lower status dogs have a harder time learning. And that at some point, if the higher status bully, if you will, ends up getting old and passing on, that the lower ranking dogs just blossom. And their people say they learn much faster. And we do know that learning theory applies equally to all species. And I learned that in part when I was doing my residency and did work with zoo animals, for example, elephants, and jaguars, and monkeys. But we've learned that with horses and cattle, and the work that I do in my day-to-day practice in dogs and cats. So I think one takeaway from this is that if you have multiple dogs or multiple cats, we need to, number one, don't add more, because they get crowded. We love these pets, but it's about their well-being, not just our enjoyment of them. And so there will be a dominance order, and we absolutely must give them opportunities to take a break. A case I saw just on Tuesday was 2 Rhodesian Ridgebacks. One of them was intimidating the other, and I counseled these folks, among many things, to erect a baby gate separating their house. They brought a diagram, a floor plan of their house, and cover it so that the dogs couldn't see each other and swap body signals, and give them a break from each other. Because the problem was that the higher status dog was intimidating the lower status dog in many situations. It was going into the other one's crate to fight with it. And it only occurred when these dogs were with their people, because they tend to be more behaviorally aroused when they're with their people. And the higher status dog can get really pushy and then react to the lower status dog's fear-related defensive postures and signals. Oh man, this can go down the wrong path very quickly. But these dogs, like so many others, not all of them, but these dogs, when they were out in the yard together, had no problem at all and even played together. Despite all of this, they were still friends. And so giving them separation, giving them a break from this hierarchical intimidation that happens more often than you might realize, that's really what this is telling me, because the stress hormones, besides slowing the learning in the subordinate rats, was also a welfare issue for them. I mean, who the heck wants to be intimidated and driven by fear? Well, none of us does. And some dogs, just like a lot of people, they're born leaders, and they're born people who are genetically programmed to be followers. They're part of an organization, they pull their weight, but they take orders and they do as they're told. And if it's a well-run organization, nobody should have a problem. But you know, I think how many of us have not been part of an organization where somebody was too darn pushy, and it damaged morale and it damaged well-being. And you cannot scold and reprimand that and get anywhere positive. Sometimes you simply have to give these creatures a break from each other, and don't overdo it. Don't get too darn many pets. So it does come to kindness, doesn't it? And empathy, in the sense that, yes, these little creatures look different, and they are not little people in furry suits, even though we love them that way. But we can walk a mile in their moccasins occasionally and say, I don't want to be intimidated in my home, and how do I prevent that from happening among my pets? Well, I don't go after the high-ranking dog or cat and give them a hard time. Carla, hello, thank you for coming. I don't scold the high-ranking dogs. Actually, the leader of a canine social group, the human, has the responsibility to support the hierarchy. You don't try to build up the low-status dog in the presence of its boss, if you will. And you don't scold the high-status dog, because you can actually cause that dog to believe that it was being reinforced for bullying a subordinate. One of the principal things you do is give them a break. So, any questions on that, you're very welcome to put it on my Facebook page. I think that's all I have to share on this. I just want to also point out, as I often do, that it's always worth it to us and to our pets to take time to build a trust and freedom of choice-based relationship with our pets. We take them in our home. We have pets because we love them, but we don't realize that we actually may be, reducing their choices, because they have to live with a fence and a building, and they don't have the freedom of movement that they naturally would if they were feral and living stray, which of course is full of other risks that we want to protect them from. But we need to make sure that they have lots of choices. So give your dogs a chance to run off leash in a safe place like a dog park, or at playtime at doggy daycare, or some other place where you know they're going to be okay, because they need to do that. Get them off property and give them a break from anybody who's pushing them around. Make sure that everybody's treated well. We can bring out their best, and we feel better about ourselves, and we can learn new ways of bringing out the best in others just by the empathy we share with our pets. So thank you for spending a little time with me this evening. And if you'd like to get this Facebook Live and every one I do every week in your mailbox, email every Tuesday morning, go to my web page, which is drjeffnickel.com, and subscribe at the bottom of the homepage. Costs nothing, and you get, for no charge, you subscribe, and I will send you my at-home pet first aid and CPR guide. Just in case something goes sideways, you'll have that handy. And then you can get my weekly blog, which is my newspaper column in the Albuquerque Journal every Tuesday morning, along with this kind of video, which I hope you find helpful. So thanks again for tuning in, and have a great week, and don't forget to wear your mask.